In the 16th century, a man with a gold-hooped earring and a little goatee picked up a quill and wrote some of the finest sonnets the world has ever seen. 500 years later, a man with nothing better to do sits down with a microphone and tries to work out what the hell that bloke was going on about. Welcome to the final couplet. Hello and welcome back to the final couplet with me, Theo Cowan. We're on Sonnet 45, which means this is episode 45. I guess that's a bit of a landmark, isn't it? And unfortunately, I've had a little scan of Sonnet 45, and for me, it's not a classic, and it's another part 2 of a sonnet, which is annoying. I wish he'd label it. I've said this in the past when we've had sonnets that go over 2 separate sonnets. So, it's not really a sonnet, is it, Shakespeare? I mean, if you're starting the next sonnet with a continuation, it's not a sonnet because a sonnet is 14 lines. And it feels like, he's found a little life hack here to make it 2 times 14, which is 28. That's quick maths for you. That's why I'm not doing a maths podcast. Anyway, so this is another example of a part 1, part 2. So in many ways we can call this Sonnet 44 part 2, which Shakespeare should have done. He should have called it that, but he didn't. He scammed us all. And back in the day, if I was sat there desperately waiting for Shakespeare's next sonnet and it was just a continuation, I'd be a bit pissed off. But look, I think it might be a bit useful to quickly recap what happened in the last sonnet and what the sort of general theme was. And that was basically Shakespeare is apart from his lover. There's a distance between them and he's sort of sad about that, and he's describing himself as the elements. So earth and water and fire and air, they come into it a lot, and theme continues throughout this next sonnet 45. Let's take a listen, shall we, and then we can break it down. The other 2, slight air and purging fire, are both with thee wherever I abide. The first my thought, the other my desire. These present absent with swift motion slide. For when these quicker elements are gone, in tender embassy of love to thee, my life, being made of 4, with 2 alone sinks down to death, oppressed with melancholy, until life's composition be recured by those swift messengers returned from thee, who even but now come back again, assured of thy fair health, recounting it to me. This told, I joy, but then no longer glad, I send them back again, and straight grow sad. So there it is, Sonnet 45, and as you can hear, very much a continuation of Sonnet 44. I can't remember if in any of his other sonnets he was this into the elements, but they're really playing a big part over these 2 sonnets, aren't they? The air and fire and water and earth. And actually he's sort of slagging off water and earth. He's sort of more into the air and fire. Water and earth are sort of grounding elements in his eyes and drag him down. They're heavy and sad, whereas fire and earth are sort of light and pure and full of love. But let's look at this line by line and try and work out what the hell Shakespeare was going on about in this one. So obviously he starts as a continuation of last one, which is weird because he starts with the other 2. It's like you had to remember that in Sonnet 44, if I just go back to Sonnet 44 here, he's talking about earth and water. And now Sonnet 45 starts with fire and air. So you had to remember, if you weren't reading these back to back, it would be a nightmare. You had to remember that he was talking about earth and water, and now he's talking about air and fire. Anyway, I'll stop being annoyed about it and dive in. The other two, slight air and purging fire, are both with thee wherever I abide. So the other two elements, slight air, sort of weightless air, and purging fire, so a sort of cleansing fire, are with you, the recipient of the poem, my love, wherever I am. So wherever I am in the world, those two elements are with you. The first my thought, the other my desire. These present absent with swift motion slide. So the first of those elements, air, is his thoughts, and the second, fire, is his desire. Fire is my desire. He missed a trick there, not rhyming those two. Now I didn't know how to pronounce this. Do you say, these present absent with swift motion slide, or these present absent with swift motion slide? I think it's the first one. I'm pretty sure it's the first one. And he's saying these two elements go back and forth between us. They sort of slide between us. And of course those elements are representing his thoughts and his desire. So they're constantly sort of going back and forth between him and his lover. For when these quicker elements are gone, in tender embassy of love to thee, my life, being made of four, with two alone, sinks down to death, oppressed with melancholy. And here it takes a little dark turn, because he's saying the thing is, when fire and air are off on their love errand, I am a person made up of four elements. So I am made up of fire, air, earth and water. And when fire and air are off doing their thing, then I'm just left with earth and water. And being with those two alone is very heavy and sinks me down into a melancholy, into an oppressed melancholy. So it's like a depression when he's just left with earth and water. And I think this is relating to, the humours, but he's using the elements. And so he's saying a person needs to be made up of the four elements in order to be whole and complete and happy and contented. But here he isn't. And that sucks. And, dare I say, it's a bit harsh on earth and water, because earth and water are lovely elements in their own right. And I don't know what's so good about air and fire. I'd be happy with earth and water. Quite grounding, and I would have thought thoughtful, but he's obviously painting them in a bad light. But he's in a bad place, isn't he? Because he's in love. And as always, I have to respect Shakespeare's opinion and writing. Until life's composition be recured by those swift messengers returned from thee, who even now come back again assured of thy fair health, recounting it to me. So this is a continuation. He's saying he's really sad, he's sort of depressed, until fire and air come back and tell me all about my love and how you're doing and if you're doing well and stuff. So it's almost like, well, this is how I like to think of it. He's writing this poem and he's saying, oh, I'm so depressed and I need the other two elements back. And then there's a knock on the door, opens up the door. Who is it? It's air and fire. And they're there, and Shakespeare said, come on in, so good to have you back. Take your hat off and take your shoes off and all that. And how's my lover then? Is he all right? And air and fire are like, yeah, he's doing really well. He's in good health. And look, we'll tell you all about him. That is essentially what the sonnet is saying. He's saying he's not complete until they come back and they say he's in good health. Now, we are on to the final couplet, which is, are you ready? This told I joy, but then no longer glad. I send them back again, and straight grow sad. Now look, I don't like to criticise Shakespeare's writing, because obviously he is thought of as probably the greatest writer of all time. But this sort of feels a bit like something I would have written in primary school, if I'm being quite honest. This told I joy. I joy? I don't know about that, Shakespeare. I am joyful. That works. I joy seems like you're just trying to squeeze it into the rhyming pattern, and that for me sounds clunky. So this told I joy, but then no longer glad. So he's saying, when I get told about my lover's good health and how great he is by air and fire, I'm happy. I joy. And then I grow sad again, because I miss my lover. It's as simple as that. So when they're telling me about him, I then get really sad. Like, initially I'm joyful, and then I'm like, oh, but bloody hell, I'm miles away from him, and that sucks. So what does he do? He sends fire and air back again to his lover, and then grows depressed again. And it's a never-ending cycle. Pretty sad stuff, really. But to be honest, I'd be sad if I'd written that last final couplet there. And you know, with writing like that, he must be in a really bad place. Don't you think? Am I the only one that thinks that sounds like a kid's written it? Like he's let his kid have a go on the quill at the end and said, oh, Shakespeare Jr., come over here. How about you write the final couplet? And Shakespeare Jr. is, 5 or 6 years old. And he's gone, yeah, all right, this told I joy, but then no longer glad. I send them back again, and straight grow sad. There's a theory. And you can use that if you want to talk to any historians or scholars about this. You can say, did you know that Sonnet 45... I believe the final couplet was written by Shakespeare's kid. Just throwing it out there. I think we could spread that word, and people would probably believe it. Right, that is enough analysing. Let's put this to our story, shall we? Now, a quick recap for those that have forgotten this amazing Shakespearean saga that I've been creating week on week. Or if you're joining for the first time, what I do is I create this amazing Shakespearean saga for you. And really, I like to think it's better than the sonnets themselves. Anyway, so Shakespeare is away in John Donne's holiday cottage, and he is still sending sonnets to John Donne, even though John Donne is sort of John Donne with him, if you know what I mean. I think I've made that joke before, but make it again, why not? And John Donne is happily with Shakespeare's ex-wife, and they're together as a couple. And Shakespeare, he still is in love with John Donne. He can't help it. Meanwhile, Shakespeare's also accidentally delivered a message, a love letter, to his frenemy, Ben Jonson. And that might tie into things at some point. Just keep that thread going. But at the moment, Shakespeare has sent his cat, Mercutio, to deliver Sonnet 44 to John Donne, because his horse, Hooflet, has gone missing. So Shakespeare is essentially stuck in the middle of the countryside. He can't leave, but instead of sending help and stuff, he's still writing sonnets, which is a bit weird. Anyway, so that's the situation, and Shakespeare's obviously upset, but he's sent this sonnet with Mercutio. Mercutio's walked for bloody miles to get to London from where they are, and he's delivered the sonnet. And let's find out how John Donne receives it, and indeed how Sonnet 45 fits into all this. John Donne finishes reading Sonnet 44. He looks up from it and calls to Shakespeare's ex-wife and says, "It's another bloody sonnet from Shakespeare. And she said, oh no, it's like junk mail. Can't we block his letters or something? Is there a way of doing that? To put a blocker? Maybe we could put a little plaque outside saying no junk mail. That might work. And John Donne says, good idea. That's quite innovative, actually. I'll get to work on that straight away. In the meantime, do you want to have a read of this? And she said, no, not really. I think it's quite depressing. He sounds quite sad at the moment. And John Donne says, yeah, I'll tell you what, I'll just throw it in the fire, shall I? That would be quite funny, actually, if I throw it in the fire, because this sonnet has loads of stuff about fire and stuff in it. So that would be quite funny if I just throw it in the fire, you know? And Shakespeare's ex-wife had stopped listening. But John Donne threw it in the fire anyway and got on with his day. Meanwhile, Mercutio was outside and slowly traipsing back to Shakespeare. It took him 7 days to walk back to Shakespeare's little hut in the countryside. At this point, he was so malnourished, he was clawing himself along the dirt paths, desperate for a bit of water, a bit of food, and finally he made it back to Shakespeare's cottage. Shakespeare opened the door and said, bloody hell, where have you been? It's been nearly 2 weeks. I've been going insane here. I've sent you out with my fire and air, and I've just been stuck with my water and earth. And Mercutio looks up at him and thinks, he's truly lost his mind. What the hell is he talking about? Anyway, I just need some water and some food. And Shakespeare said, look, I'm really sorry, but I forgot that I'd actually written a part 2 of that sonnet, and I did not give it to you, which is annoying, I know, and I know you've travelled a long way and it's taken a long time, but it's quite important that you deliver this part 2. Mercutio looks up at him. Please no. Please, God, don't send me back there. And Shakespeare said, please, it's for love's sake. And of course, Mercutio is thinking, look, he doesn't love you. But Mercutio is a cat, and he can't talk. Shakespeare, at the very least, gives Mercutio a saucer of milk and a kipper, and then ties Sonnet 45 to his little back and sends him on his way. Mercutio walks again for miles and miles back into London, where he arrives once again at John Donne's house. John Donne opens up the door and points at the plaque that he's installed in the last week and says, look what it says. It says no junk mail. I don't want this. And Mercutio looks up at him with those little green eyes and drops the sonnet on his doorstep. And John Donne says, well, that's a cheek. You've got a cheek, haven't you? Now shoo, get out of here. And he picks up the sonnet and calls up to Shakespeare's ex-wife and says, you won't believe it. He sent another one. And Shakespeare's ex-wife says, I think we need to go and have a chat with him, don't we? This is crazy. He's gone mad. And at that moment, passing in the street, is Ben Jonson. What a coincidence. And he says, hello, John. Hello, Shakespeare's ex-wife. How are you? And they say, good, thank you. You won't believe this drama with Shakespeare. And Ben Jonson says, oh, what's that? And John Donne says, well, he's still sending us our sonnets, and we haven't been replying to them, so it's a bit weird that he keeps sending them. And Ben Jonson says, I think I know the mix-up. He's actually meaning to send those to me, but obviously he's given the messenger the wrong address. And John Donne says, right. Well, that does make sense because the messenger is a cat, so probably wouldn't know the right address, I guess. And they laugh and laugh. And Ben Jonson says, well, give it here then. It's probably for me. And John Donne says, oh, gladly, here you go. I'd give you the one before this, but it's in the fire. I burnt it. Ben Jonson thanks him and leaves. On his way back through London town, he reads to himself Sonnet 45. The other two elements, thin air and cleansing fire, are both with you wherever I may be. Air is my thoughts, and fire is my desire. The two elements slide between us. I'm actually made up of 4 elements, but when these quicker elements have gone off on the errand of love to you, I'm left with the other 2, which makes me very depressed and brings me closer to death, until fire and air return and make me balanced again. Oh look, here they are now. They've just returned from their visit to you and told me you're doing all right. I'm really happy to hear that. But then I get sad because I miss you and send them back to you and get really, really depressed again. Wow, I feel bad for Mercutio in this whole story, and I think Shakespeare's taken him for a ride. And if he's not careful, Mercutio will leave him or die. I mean, he's been worked so hard by Shakespeare here, and for what? For some shoddy sonnets? What a joke. Anyway, I'll see you next week. Bye.